That's the Secretary of State. All right, no budget cut, no cuts for him. We're going to take care of a little old business. We wanted to wrap our minds around a couple things we did last week to start. And Representative Hughley had a House Resolution 73. If you would, this is just a formality. If you'll just briefly give us a 2-minute on what it does, and then we'll see what the committee wants to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the committee, I bring before you House Resolution 73. As you noted, it was unfinished business from last term, and it seeks to compensate a gentleman who was wrongfully incarcerated for over 11 years. The compensation resolution calls for $400,000 to be paid over a 20-year period. Is that short enough?
Wow, that is outstanding. And at this time, the chair will entertain a motion. At this time, I will entertain a motion from number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to pass House Resolution 73, LC 211996.
Got a motion to pass. Do I hear a second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Thank you. Last week, the committee also took up House Bill 127 by Representative Chairman Jay Powell of the 171st. And at this time, the chair will entertain a motion on the committee.
Move to pass, Mr. Chairman.
Got a move to pass. Do we hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Moving right along. House Resolution 360 will be heard today by the committee for the purposes of a hearing only. Author of that bill is Representative Jason Spencer of the 180. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling the resolution up quickly, and members of the committee. You will have before you a packet there with some graphs there at the front, but the purpose of this resolution is to essentially create a committee that would study our dependency on federal funds. If you look at the graph that I have given you, over the last 10 years or so, the state of Georgia's budget has increasingly become somewhat dependent on federal funds. There is a graph behind that shows you the percentage of those funds, and in the last graph table you will see over to the far right there are the percentages of a portion of our state budget on federal funding. In 2011 and 10, you'll see that I have those highlighted in pink. That's where we had the ERA funds, the stimulus money, and that money has essentially gone away at this point. But the purpose of bringing this forward is that we all know that in Washington they're having their issues with balancing the budget, and our budget depends somewhat of what happens with that political picture up in D.C. So that's the reason and the motivation for bringing the resolution, is so we can study our parts of the budget. That will we have to eliminate certain parts of our budget if certain programs at the federal level or funding goes away or reduced. So in order for us to become somewhat self-sufficient, then I think it would be prudent to have a committee of senior members of the appropriations committees and those that the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker deem appropriate to be on this committee to study what it would take to change our budget or adapt our budget to those fiscal realities. So essentially what the resolution does is it composes and creates a 15-member committee. 4 members appointed from the Senate by the Lieutenant Governor based on seniority, and 4 members of the House of Representatives appointed by the Speaker also based on seniority. Also have other appointees from the Office of the Governor as well, from a charitable organization, and on lines 27 and 28, and the chairmen of each respective appropriations committee. So essentially, they will study the percentage of the state budget that is dependent upon federal funds, and they'll create a plan to address any loss of federal money. And also the committee will include in its final report any recommendations for the state to change its laws accordingly. And that's essentially what the committee does. It's expected to be formed and then shall be abolished by December the 1st, 2013, when those recommendations have been made to the General Assembly. That's essentially what it does.
Thank you, Representative Spencer. Questions from members of the committee? Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, I have a couple of questions. Is there any distinction in federal funds based on, I know we receive a number of different types of federal funds. Some are matching funds, some are automatic grants that come and are distributed each year. Is there any distinction, or is just any federal dollar or any federal fund? That'd be the first question. I have a follow-up.
Well, that would be any federal money that the state could potentially lose as a result of the fiscal situation occurring in Washington. That would be open to any federal funding whatsoever. So that's why the study committee, I believe, is needed to determine what the course of action would be in the event that a large loss of money would occur.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, follow-up question.
Please.
On line 15 and 18, you say that the appointments by the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker are going to be based on seniority. I guess my question is, why do you even need an appointment if it's based on seniority? Are you really taking the ability of the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker, the ability for them to appoint who they think would best serve, and is it purely on seniority?
Well, my thinking there was most of the members that have been here the longest and have most of the time have a lot more institutional knowledge, and that was my thinking why I put in the language in there, not to take any prerogatives away from the Speaker or the Lieutenant Governor.
So you're saying that your intention would be to have flexibility, but it's to be
Sure.
the more seniority?
Sure.
Okay. Because I'm assuming you'd understand someone like yourself would certainly not be in that situation. I'm just saying that.
I understand, but like I said, my thinking was that to rely on that institutional knowledge that more senior members have.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up. His point, though, is I'm assuming, I can't remember, the most senior member would be Calvin Smyrie. So the Speaker doesn't have to appoint him if it's seniority. It's mutually exclusive almost.
Well, it'd be based on that seniority. He could have the choice, but base it on seniority.
Well, he doesn't have any choice if he's the most senior member.
Again, the reasoning for that was to apply that institutional knowledge to the study committee. But we can change that to be more flexible.
Chairwoman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation of your bill. It's definitely food for thought. I'm probably one of the senior members of the General Assembly, which I hate to admit publicly, but
She started when she was 9.
I've seen several different types of study committees through the years, and served on some that were inclusive all over the state. And the General Assembly generally doesn't authorize per diem for people who are already in their role in state government, some form or another, usually the executive branch. And most of the time, the other members of the committee, their career in itself is supportive of serving on that board. So I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to get participation, but essentially the 5-day allowance limit was good, and we really don't enlarge our role of appropriations in the General Assembly other than our own House and Senate members. Just to point that out to you.
Thank you.
Representative Stephen Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had two quick comments. I think Chair Lady Smith brought up the same point I did. There was nothing based for per diem in this thing, first and foremost. There was no mention of that. The second most question I would have is, following up on Chairman Hamilton's, on line 14 and line 16, you don't set apart how many members of the majority and the minority party need to be in there. And if this was to move forward, I would think you might want to consider a sub on those type of things to be specific. If the Speaker was going to do this, how many members of the majority party, how many members of the minority party would need to be eligible as well?
Thank you for that point.
And is Rusty Kid automatically on it?
We'll work on that language, and I appreciate.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's do a little bit of the lifting here. We got the Governor's Office of Workforce Development with us today, and if you would, please just kind of tell us who you are and what you do as quickly as you can, and we'll go to the document. Page 12, I think, for members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Tricia Pridemore. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Workforce Development. It is a privilege to be with you all today. Field any questions that you might have. Section 26.10 of the budget tracker includes the budgeted amount for the Governor's Office of Workforce Development, including the $73,361,918 of federal funds received into the state for the operation of the Workforce Investment Act program. Those funds have a 3-year carryover. We are currently operating off of what is program years 10, 11, and 12 funds. Add one of those, and that gets you these state fiscal numbers. We do not yet have the dollar amount for the next round of grants. The NOO, the Notice of Obligation for the federal grant, is received by the state in April. And once it is received, then we'll know what the appropriation will be for the upcoming year. We are an attached agency to the Office of Planning and Budget, and they do our federal grants management for us.
Any questions from members of the committee? Thank you.
Thank you.
Department of Natural Resources, page 15 for members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Mark Williams, Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources, and I'll begin at 33-1. First division is coastal resources. You've got 2 statewide adjustments and then a reduction of $69,000. This is the same cut we discussed in FY13 amended, and this will be replaced with federal funds that will spread throughout the division. 33-1-4. A cut of $20,000 is just a general reduction in all operating expenses. Next down will be 33-2 in Department Administration. You've got 3 statewide adjustments, and then we're going to eliminate 1 vacant position of $140,147, and it's a position for retirement. We will not be replacing it. I'm going to skip environmental protection and move straight to historic preservation, which is 33-5. You got 2 statewide adjustments, and then 33-5-3. We're transferring 4 positions and funds because the mission suits another division better, and this activity has been relocated from the Parks program to the historic preservation program. And then 33-5-4. We're replacing state funds with federal funds of $18,316. It was the same as the FY13 amended. Next, we'll go to state parks. 33-6. You got 2 statewide adjustments, and then 33-6-3. We're reducing operating expenses, $304,392. We're reducing operating expenses in supplies and materials, and some of our contractual services will be renegotiating in 2014. Right under that, 33-6-4 is $273,619 reduction. This is the transfer of those positions from state parks over to historic preservation. In 33-6-5, we're just reducing funds for personal services of $237,000. This cut's a continuation of the FY13 amended. We're reducing staff at the headquarters level. All these eliminations are at the administrative level to keep our positions filled in the field as much as possible. In the PPA 33-7, you see a reduction of $211,000. As you know, we went from 5 divisions to 4 divisions a couple of years ago. This was a remnant program left over that we were phasing out, so that 10% we will not need. That moves us to Wildlife Resources 33-9. You got 2 statewide reductions, then a $433,000, $423 reduction. We've eliminated 2 administrative positions in the fisheries section. Last year we consolidated our fisheries regions, and so we no longer need those positions. And we're also eliminating a vacant administrative position in our law enforcement section and may utilize a little hourly help in that as needed. We held some ranger positions vacant until this fiscal year, and actually we didn't start them until January, but they'll be coming online in May also, 9 positions. And 33-9-4, this is just to reduce in operating expenses. We're putting off some capital outlay, some new construction in fisheries and boating access, and we also will be renegotiating our leases and think we'll have some savings there. 33-9-5, replacing state funds with existing other federal funds of $291,000. In there, we'll be we're redoing our Sapelo ferry fees and using Pittman Robinson funds again to offset some of those cuts.
Any questions from members of the committee? Leader Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Commissioner Williams, I may have missed this. Can you tell me why you skipped over 33.3?
That's EPD. They'll be up next.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Allison.
Commissioner, good to see you again.
You too.
I just had 2 questions. One, you had talked about your renegotiation leases on WMAs. I take it with the settling of the financial crisis, are we able to keep most of our WMAs open this year?
Yes. We don't have any plans to close any WMAs. Most of our partners have been, they understand the economic realities as well.
Okay.
They've worked with us real well.
And my last question was, I take it we're just transferring these positions that are currently in park supervision from the Parks Division over to the Historical Preservation?
Mm-hmm.
Are those particular parks? Are these just relocated officers, or?
You know, it was parks and historic sites.
Right.
And so we had some cultural resource people located in parks, and their mission really fits better going to historic sites.
Are these same folks that are just moving from one branch? Okay.
Same people.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
And just a little language for my thinking. There's a couple places in here, Commissioner, where you've got to eliminate.
Mm-hmm.
One vacant, eliminate, 2 filled, and yet you talked about held vacant ranger position. From a language perspective,
Okay, we held vacant. We didn't start them in school.
would you rather eliminate or would you rather hold vacant?
Well, we were filling the hole last year, and so we held them over and didn't start them to school till a little bit later. But we will be 200 rangers strong. Pretty much that's about the right average. We'll have about the same amount of rangers this year, maybe a few more than we had last year. We just started them to school later. They'll be graduating in May.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank y'all.
And EPD, hi. And what page are we on here?
Hi, I'm Mary Walker. I'm EPD's finance director. Director Turner had a commitment out of state, and he asked me to pass along his regrets. I'll walk you through the recommended changes to EPD's budget in fiscal 14. I'll skip the first 2 items, which are just statewide changes, and move to section 33.3.3, which reduces funds for personal services by $575,000. This summer, both our land and our water branches were reorganized, and this generated some positions that we were able to eliminate. Several years ago, we used to have 5 divisions, and those were rolled, as part of previous budget cuts, those were rolled into 3. But those reorganizations didn't really filter through, and so this allowed us to kind of fully filter through and generate some efficiencies. In Section 33.3.4, the Governor recommended the addition of $500,000 in funding for the regional water councils. As part of the statewide water planning, the state had a considerable investment in developing and informing these councils, but since the plans were adopted in 2011, there really haven't been any funds for their continued operation. As part of all of their plans that were adopted, every one of them recommended that the planning continue, that the council effort continue. And so this recommendation addresses that. There are really 2 pieces of this, and the first is $350,000 in baseline support so that each of the councils can continue meeting. This will provide $35,000 per council for general meeting support and some staff support so they can conduct a survey of how plan implementation is happening. And the second piece of it is $150,000 to be a pool of funds which will be competitively awarded for advanced implementation projects. Section 33.3.5, the recommendation eliminates one-time funding for the Georgia Water Policy Center, and this was an add we received in fiscal 13. Item 33.3.6 is the reduction of funds for real estate rent. This is our Augusta office. We are just shrinking our footprint there. We're relocating to a smaller office. And finally, the Governor's recommendation reduces funds for contracts by $140,000, and this is our contract for air forecasting, which we will continue, but we will fund with other funds. So with these changes, the total recommendation for EPD's, the Environmental Protection Program's budget in fiscal 14 is $25.8 million. Let's see. Moving to the trust funds, Section 33.4 is the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund, and the Governor's recommendation is the same as in Supplemental 13, which is that EPD retains 100% of the appropriation and use it for cleanups, for local government reimbursements, and for program operations. So with this and the supplemental appropriation, we will be able to catch up on our current backlog, everything that we have in-house in terms of local government reimbursements. And finally, Section 33.8, the Solid Waste Trust Fund. This program was not exempted from the 3% cuts, and so the budget reflects a reduction of $57,704, and this will be taken in program operations. So with this reduction, the total solid waste recommendation is $1,865,000.
Any questions from members of the committee? Chairwoman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation.
You're much.
This is the first time you've had to do this?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Maybe I asked this question.
Yeah, let's see.
I just want to thank the governor, governor staff, and all
Okay.
for funding our regional water councils. We absolutely needed that to continue, both for our state and our local. We put most of the effort into making this happen.
Yes.
And then I also want to say in a way that we are recommitted once more to the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund. It's something we need to do.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions, members of the committee? Ms. Walker, did you say that with that 100% funding on 33.4.1 that would actually totally eliminate the backlog?
By fiscal 14, we will have completely eliminated the backlog. Yes, sir.
Chairwoman Smith.
May I add something too? I know it eliminates our backlog and takes care of our local government and obligations.
Yes.
Such as that. Could you expand on the ones we've not yet begun to investigate? I know that there's another category that also needs funding. Could you expand on that?
Okay. On the hazardous sites inventory, we have 367 some odd, I think approximately, sites that are private party. We know there's a responsible private party. Most of those we are getting to as part of program operations through enforcement actions and just making sure that the responsible party pay for those cleanups, because from the state's perspective, we would much rather have the responsible party pay for that cleanup than have it languish and ultimately become an abandoned site. So we are working to get to almost all of those. There are 31 of those that we currently don't have staffing and funding to get to, but we're doing what we can with our current program operations budget. There's also a pool of, I think there are 63 abandoned sites, and the total cost of the cleanup for those is $63 million. $63 million, yes, ma'am. We are currently working on one of those. The governor recommended some funding in amended fiscal 12 for us to continue cleanup on one site, but we have the balance of those that are unfunded. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
And thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chairman.
Department of Revenue. Page 18 for members of the committee. How are you? Good.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Afternoon.
I'm happy to go line by line through all this, but again, I guess let me start. I'm Doug McGinnity. I'm the State Revenue Commissioner. We try to bring goodwill and cheer to all taxpayers in Georgia, and usually succeed on a daily basis. I can go line item by line item if you'd like, but really, kind of big picture, we have two big categories of cost: IT and people. And most of the reductions that you see in the 2014 budget will relate to people. We handle most of this through attrition, but depending on where the final number goes, we may or may not have to look at reducing that headcount further. Much of this we can absorb in efficiencies at the department. Some will have a revenue impact at the department because that's what we do. When we reduce people, there is some corresponding impact on revenue at the state level. The total amount is, I think, in the 4 to 4.5% range. Our headcount has already come down considerably from a year ago, over 10%, and that will continue to drift downwards with these reductions. The other significant change, I guess significant, in the budget is the movement of funds generated by the department and swapping those today, and this has been the case over the last several years. The department has kept much of that funding in exchange for less state funding. I think the proposal going forward starting next year is all that money will be sent to the state general fund. In return, more state general fund dollars will be appropriated to the department. I believe it's a wash or something close to a wash from the department's perspective. And from the department's perspective, we're relatively indifferent as to how the department's funded. So that's the other items that are going on. There's one item I should draw your attention to, which is not in here but is worth addressing, and that's the program that the department runs with a vendor to fight fraud in the state. To give you a couple of facts, to give you some context, last year we started this program, last calendar year we started the program, and in 2012 calendar year we stopped, this number won't be exactly right, 40,000 plus returns, totaling about $22 million of what we considered fraudulent returns. That program cost the state, Greg, I think $3 to $4 million. Is that right? Okay, $3 million, just shy of $3 million. So the state obviously generated it was a smart, very smart program to run. Cost the state less than $3 million to block over $20 million of fraudulent returns. In the budget for last year, 2013, and this year, 2014, that we're talking about, today, the department has funds to run that program through the first 6 months of calendar year 2013. In the 2013 budget, originally all the funds were put in to run it for the full calendar year. Y'all took some of that money out of 2013, but my recommendation would be, given the validity or the results of that program, that we need to put that money into 2014, and that total is about $1.5 million that I would recommend you put into the 2014 budget so that we can run that program for the full calendar year of 2013. We still see an awful lot of fraudulent returns flowing into the state. Georgia is doing more than all, or most, if not all, states in that regard. And this is a program other states are adopting. So it would be my strong recommendation that we continue to do it, because I think it generates great results for the state. But that will require putting some additional money in the 2014 budget. And I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Leader Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, I guess my sort of macro question is that if you look at the cuts that are being made, specifically lines 41.7.3, actually I'll come back to that one, 41.9.3 4 and 41.10.4. How, given that the way the state generates revenue is the collection and compliance with tax policy, what will the impact be on our ability to actually generate the revenue we need, since we're cutting the people who are going to get the money?
So I think there's, you can divide it in sort of two parts, and drawing the line between the two is somewhat difficult. Because of the money that the state has spent over the last several years on technology, we are able to run the department more efficiently than we have in the past. So I think for less state dollars, less people, we can generate the same results in part. And so some of these reductions in costs to run the department are driven by the efficiencies of the technology that we're now using at the department. And as I'm sure you recall, the state has spent over $40 million over the last several years implementing ITS, the integrated tax system. So we can do more with less and generate the same results. But there are clearly some impacts to revenue. It's always difficult to put a number on it, but we can generate averages of what our compliance people generate every year. I think those numbers we send down to folks here every month. And you know, at the end of the day, it's really a policy decision how big y'all and the governor want the Department of Revenue to be. I think there's no doubt on the margin, extra employees add some revenue and less employees subtract some revenue. Given what we do, you would expect nothing else.
Representative Dickey.
Could you tell me a little bit about this 41.3 forest land protection grants, about the amount of that, which?
So the forest land protection grants are money that passes through the department. We don't generate the number. We merely administer the program. So this number does not come from us. It comes from, I guess, OPB in terms of the amount. And the counties obviously have a great stake in making sure that that number is as big as they want it to be, because I believe the way the program works, it is compensating them for this program that's run at the state level. So I don't know where that number is generated from, whether it's the right number or not. We merely pass it through.
Okay, so that's going to counties.
That is correct.
That's right. So you don't have anything to do with that figure. That's coming from somewhere else.
That is correct.
Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, good to see you. Two questions. One on the fraud detection that you're talking about. Over the last year or two, I remember last year getting some constituent calls that were concerned about the delay in their processing of their tax return, and from what I understood at the time, it was based on a new way of tracking tax credits and everything, verifying it before, and it slowed the process down. My question is that part of this fraud detection that you're talking about? Is all of that together, or are those two separate things that you're doing? Is this something new that you're doing in addition to that?
Based on that question, I think they're probably different. So the fraud protection, we run all refund claims through some databases that try to identify if the person filing the return is actually who they say they are. And to give you a perfect example, it happened to my wife a couple of years ago. Someone got hold of her name and social security number, filed a return on her behalf, made up some information, put a new address on the return, and we processed it. So when we actually filed our return, it got blocked, which is somewhat ironic. So the next year, though, that same return would have been sent through these databases, and it would say, well, that's the right name, that's the right social number, but this address doesn't look right. In fact, we have her at some of these other addresses. We're going to kick that return out, ask some additional information from the taxpayer. They can get online and do it, and once they did that, the return is released and on it goes. So there is certainly, for some people, they're slowed down in the process because of that process. Right. And obviously, we're trying to balance speed versus blocking fraud. On the credit side, historically, we have been somewhat inefficient on processing tax returns claiming certain types of credits, in fact, most types of credits. And it's one of the things that we have looked at. It's one of the things we've worked on, and this year we our work plan is to be much more efficient in those. We will process those much more automatically. We have ways of matching up some people who have gotten prior approvals for credits, especially around, say, SSOs, which was a big issue last year, and we should be a lot more efficient in processing those returns this year. So it would not surprise me that somebody faced that issue last year or in prior years. My hope would be the number of people who face that this year and going forward is much less.
Okay, thank you. And to be very complete on this, I think most of the constituents that I talked to, once they understood the reasoning, they were very understanding. I think it's a smart way to do it, and I commend you for doing that. The call center, I know I was very impressed about a year or so ago when you started comparing the improvements that were made from an efficiency standpoint and actually comparing it to the business community, business matrix, or private industry. I'm just curious, with all the budget cuts and all the challenges and reduction in force and things that you had, how are we doing in that area, and what type of an impact is that having on the great improvement of efficiency? Are we losing ground, or what have you done?
We are not losing ground. We run two big call centers. On the tax side, we continue to show very good times. We still measure it daily. We have folks looking at it. We shift resources around as necessary. Obviously, there's some impact on the margin as we have less folks, but we've worked hard to attack the problem, which is people are calling us for something, and the more efficient we are in processing returns, the more we.
What type of hold time are you looking at experiencing?
I saw the report for yesterday. We were under a minute, under 2 minutes. I think the highest it has gotten this processing season so far in the last 2 months is in the 4 to 8 minute range, and then we quickly knocked it back down under that.
Thank
so
you.
we're still very much concentrate on those numbers.
Right.
Any other members of the committee? Chairwoman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. I do have a question about something you brought up a couple of years ago, and that was the transition for the small mom and pop taxpayers, business, and such as that they were going to have to file electronically, and you were transitioning into that process, and that's where I tended to get a lot of phone calls. So I was curious. You were going to put in place a process to help those who could not file electronically, and I was just wondering how that's working now.
As far as I know, I think it's worked pretty well, and I kind of judge how things are working by how much stuff winds up in my desk or on my desk or phone calls to the commissioner's office. And I have not heard many, if any, complaints about that. I think folks who don't have access to a computer and have a legitimate reason not to file, we grant that request. That number, I think, is relatively small, and most people who got transitioned over have now gone through the pain and can file online. So I have not heard a lot of issues about that, but if you hear otherwise, we would certainly like to know that so we can address those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One more
Yes.
comparison here. We're also looking at transitioning over to electronic reporting in other areas, and so you handled that transition. Did you offer support, or how did you help the small mom and pops file electronically?
I think we've all tried to do everything you can to educate folks and get them comfortable. We obviously get on the phone with them, walk them through the first time. Many times it does not end the first time. They call back the second month or the third month. I think we've provided training classes for those folks, and we've tried to update and make our website more user-friendly. I don't think it's by any means all of the way there yet, but I think we've looked at doing everything we can to make it easier for folks. I mean, my view is the vast majority of taxpayers in Georgia are trying to do the right thing, and for those folks, we ought to be as simple and easy to use and then just get out of their way. For the folks who aren't doing the right thing, we ought to be a real pain. But the folks you described, we ought to be as friendly as we can.
But there was some tailoring to the needs of the various considering another large piece of legislation in filing electronically locally has been raised as a problem. So you did more customer service orientation, education to allow for this process to take place.
Yes, but I'm sure if you went and talked to all the taxpayers, there would have been probably issues in that, and some of it's just painful learning a new process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, if I heard you earlier, and this is a friendly question, I just want to see if I got numbers correct.
Thank you for being so generous with your response.
The frauds, I think, is $20 million and about 40,000 returns.
So we run two programs at the department. One is this program where we run refunds returns through databases. That program blocked $22 million worth of returns. We also set up our systems with certain rules in place to catch other fraud, and that program blocked 75-ish million of fraudulent returns as well. So all told, last calendar year, the department blocked over 100,000 returns, 160,000 returns, I think, totaling just shy of $100 million. It's a huge problem in Georgia.
Yeah, I was just trying to get, I mean, when you do the averages, it's a lot of money. When you do the averages, it's not a big amount per return. Is that because a lot of the returns have small numbers and you have a big one, or is it just, you know, a few dollars with a large number of returns? I'm just trying to get the order of magnitude.
I think the folks who think they figured out the system think there's a sweet spot of, you know, obviously if somebody tries to push their $10 million refund, it's unlikely to get sent through automatically. And so they think there are certain numbers. In fact, we've seen a new pattern this year already where they're picking a certain number, and for whatever reason, it worked the first time through, and they started to push a whole bunch through that we've now stopped. But they tend to average not a crazy number, but enough to make it interesting to the folks who are doing it.
Sure. Okay, if I could, quick follow-up. Again, in your personnel reduction, several of the members had asked, I know, is this slowing down, you know, the average Georgian? I mean, I just want us to get a feel in the committee and the appropriation process from getting their refunds, or is it slowing down business that have audits in place? I mean, is there a place, and I'm not asking you to be a whiner per se, but on the other hand, I want you to point out the places where the cuts are not only affecting your ability perhaps to collect revenue, but also affecting your ability to deliver for a business, so that we're unintentionally or have the unintended consequence of these cuts actually being an obstruction to business and hurting the economy.
Rightly or wrongly, I have set the priorities of the department to at customer service, processing returns, and then compliance. And so I think under my watch at least, we will not let the customer service standards fall any significant amount. We'll continue to process the returns. And so I think the impact that you see is on the compliance side, which is chasing, folks chasing additional revenues for people who are not compliant. We still do a lot of it, but that's where the marginal impact is.
Last question. There was a fairly significant little tax matter that went through here late last session. Can you tell me how that affected you from a personnel standpoint? Did you have to move people to help business understand? I know specifically the energy tax credit has caused a lot of angst out in the community, and I'm just curious how that affected you from a financial perspective.
So from an operational perspective, the tax changes on sales tax, the energy exemption you mentioned, the agriculture exemption, didn't have a huge personnel impact. It certainly took up some time, but it's more at the policy level than the actual implementation. The piece that has taken up the most resources of the department is around 386, around the title ad valorem tax, the title transfer tax. Because we've had to reprogram our system that is sort of the backbone of that for the state, that has been the one that has taken up by far the most resources of the department, and will continue to do that even after March 1. Because of the size of the program, we had to put off some reporting, that programming that needs to be done after March 1, and then with the changes that are being proposed in this legislative session, it will continue to absorb a huge amount of resources at the department. That's the one that's been the hardest, just in terms of resources to implement.
Do you foresee title changes when somebody buys a car after March 1st? Do you foresee those lines getting long, glitches and so?
Well, I sure hope it's not for systemic glitches. I mean, that's been our job, and we feel pretty confident the system will work. There's, in any enterprise, this is basically a new enterprise, a new line of business for the state and counties. You will expect a learning curve, or you should expect a learning curve. I think there will be, some delays, and I think there'll be some friction for taxpayers in the state, especially around casual sales, folks who don't understand the new law, who show up and want a title. and are told they owe a check to the county. I think the counties will bear the brunt of that because that's where most of the transactions will take place. But I think it's something that everybody should be cognizant of, that there will be issues as it starts up. It won't be error-free for everybody. Even when the system works the way it's supposed to be, it's just enough transactions, enough different folks involved in it that there will be some learning pains. Well, I know, but yeah, I think we have worked hard with all the counties to implement that as well as possible. They've been our partners in it, and they will, bear the brunt of the changes. So I think we're in relatively good shape, but it's new and big.
Commissioner, that's almost really a perfect segue for something that I've been wanting to ask you about, especially given the March 1st deadline. I think that last year, give me a little wiggle room on my memory, but this committee put in something like $700,000 for the purposes of computers and printers.
Yep.
I think that 2 payments are supposedly already been made from the department for that contract for 1,572 printers and 1,017 computers or something like that. Has that transaction been completed?
My understanding is that, and I don't know if those numbers are exactly right, but I'm sure someone here could tell you the exact number. But the transaction, I believe, has been completed in terms of us paying HP as the vendor, and my understanding is they will start delivering this month, and all of that equipment will be delivered over the next several months to all the counties and the state. Okay,
that's where I'm headed. So it has been done? Yes, sir. And what was the amount of exactly those two equal 700,000 exactly?
The first payment was $1,500 for pilot, so we could test the equipment, and then second was the balance of the 700,000.
Okay, so and again, if I'm wrong, I think it was 1,572 printers.
Sounds about right. Yes.
And 1,017 computers that are going statewide. This was part of a 3-year plan, and you're saying the cost of those two would be the $700,000?
No. So
Okay.
I think it's important to clarify. What we tried to do is set up a program with HP so that all of the equipment could be delivered in the first year, and they were willing to do that, but we have to pay them over the next 3 years. So the total cost is 700,000 times 3.
Right.
But we're front loading the delivery and then paying them over the 3 years.
Right. So how much are these two? Since you cut them a purchase order, did you not? Okay. For $700,000 for these? Correct. Okay. And here's just what I'm thinking. I get that you can't roll out those printers to the counties on July 2nd because you just have to have a mechanism in place. Some would say you had a mechanism in place before, but maybe you had to redo the model. But what I am concerned about, going to Chairman Martin's position, is if you know there's going to be angst in the county offices because of House Bill 386, it would seem to me that the proactive thing to do would be go ahead and let those counties have their printers and their computers in place prior to that angst, just in goodwill, especially if we've already given you the money for it.
That was our plan. We would have loved to have all the equipment in before March 1. The reality is, in dealing with the vendor, we were unable to do that, and we will get as much as we can in.
So what percentage do you think will be in by March 1st?
I think a low percentage will be in by March 1st. A high percentage, or all of it, will be in by the fall.
But you get my logic? It seems like if you know that angst is coming, and you said they're going to feel it at the county level, I'm just curious on why you wouldn't treat it like a sense of urgency to relieve some of their angst. That's way too many angst in one dissertation, by the way. It gives you angst to hear that many angst.
In a perfect world, we would have, and we failed to do that.
No. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Appreciate it. the love. Secretary of State. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Brian Kemp, Secretary of State.
I am so sorry, Ms. Secretary. Page 21 for members of the committee. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start on line 42.1.1. Has everybody got that? All right. That's just a statewide adjustment. On 42.1.2, that is the transfer of the archives program to the University System of Georgia. As you know, we talked about this in the amended. The 10 positions represent 5 employees currently staffed at the archives facility in Morrow. The other 5 are currently staffed at our records center on Murphy Avenue in southwest Atlanta. Line 42.1.3 and line 42.4.3 are relative. There are currently 12 filled positions in the archives program, 5 at archives, 5 at the records center, and then we've got 2 additional IT positions in Atlanta that support the archives program as well as other IT activities in the Office of Secretary of State. When we began discussing with OPB about transitioning the archives program to the university system, we requested that the IT positions stay with our agency because they currently support the archives and other Secretary of State needs. When the budget was presented, the positions were left without funding. However, in HB 287, which is the bill that's transferring archives to the university system, lines 41 and 42 state that all employees of the current archives division will be transferred to the University System of Georgia. We respectfully ask that either the 2 IT positions transfer with the funds to the university system or the funds in the positions stay with the Office of Secretary of State. Certainly we can use these folks, but if we're not going to get them, we don't need the positions to stay with us without funding because we're just going to have to fire the individuals. So just wanted to make you aware of that. Line 42.1.4 is the cut that was required by the governor in 2014. As you know, we discussed this and amended to meet this cut. We let 5 employees go that were in the archives program on November 1st of 2012, and then we had 1 vacant position that was eliminated. On line 42.2.1, this is also another statewide adjustment. Line 42.2.2, this reduction will result in the dismissal of an hourly employee currently working in our call center. As I mentioned in the amended budget today, 1 in 4 people calling our call center will hang up because they can't get through to a representative. We've just got that high volume of calls. This reduction or loss of person, there'll be another 110 calls a day or so that won't be answered because this position is going to be vacated. And that's about what they're doing, is somewhere around 110 calls a day that they answer in our call center. In elections on line 42.3.1, this is also another statewide adjustment. Line 42.3.2, this represents the billing issue I mentioned as well in the amended budget for the GTA mainframe, which our statewide voter registration system exists. We started discussions with GTA last session when we received the projection for our statewide adjustment because it appeared to us that they had not accounted for our stage rollout of our new statewide voter registration system, which we're running right now, and it requires us to run dual databases until we can get that implementation done. And through those meetings that we both agreed that the additional funding was needed, and we were appreciative and supportive of the governor's addition of the $339,599, which really just signifies what that cost is from GTA to us. In administration, our office administration, which includes our law enforcement division, line 42.4.1 is a statewide adjustment. Line 42.4.2 is also a statewide adjustment. Line 42.4.4, this is in the 2013 budget. I think I mentioned this also in the amended. The governor provided $400,000 for to fund inspector positions for the professional licensing boards that will ultimately pay for themselves through increased citations of inspections and fines. As you know, one of the big complaints we get from a lot of the licensing boards is we're not doing enough enforcement to protect the industries that are out there and to go after folks that are competing with those that are licensed. This was a project that we felt like we could implement and have it pay for itself, so it would not only pay for itself, but it'd also be doing additional work against those folks who are, committing unlicensed practice and other violations of the law and rules. To meet the reduction in the line 42.4.4, we're going to have to not fill 2 vacant positions where we had some inspectors leave for the private sector for better paying jobs, which we just were in the process of filling those positions when we saw this additional cut. So we won't be able to fill those positions, and then we'll have to fire 3 other inspectors. In 2012, on average, an inspector was responsible for the collection of about $130,000 in administrative fines. The salary of an inspector is around $30,000. Fully loaded, it's about $47,000. So actually, by having to make this cut, we're going to decrease revenue about $650,000 to save $235,000. Also, to complete the cut, we're not going to be able to staff the executive director of the Georgia Athletic Entertainment Commission, which you commonly refer to as the boxing commissioner. As y'all know, we regulate that, mixed martial arts, boxing, and other types of fighting in the state. Our executive director left for a job in California, and because of the budget situation, we have not filled that, and with this cut, we will not be able to. And our professional licensing board, which is starts on line 42.5.1, this is another statewide adjustment. Line 42.5.2, this is a one-time reduction that removes funding for a nursing survey that was used during the nursing renewal period this year. That was a one-time implementation fee to set the survey up, so that money is no longer needed, and we agree with that recommendation. In securities, line 42.6.1, that's a statewide adjustment. Line 42.6.2, in December, we had one of our 4 securities examinators leave for a better paying position in the private sector. This reduction will not allow us to replace that examiner and will leave only 3 security examiners for the entire state of Georgia. In 2012, we only performed examinations on 2% or 62 investment advisor firms. By not being able to fill this position, we'll continue to do our job, but we will our service level and protection is going to decrease. And as you all know, I've spoken before about the Dodd-Frank legislation. We actually have more to do in securities now because of Dodd-Frank. Before the legislation, we regulated portfolios under $25 million. Now that threshold, because of Dodd-Frank, is $100 million. So we picked up, additional people that we're regulating, and if that cut holds, we'll have to we won't be able to fill that position of one of our examiners. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to answer any questions. I know I went through that quickly, but most of it I think the committee has heard before, but I'm glad to answer any questions.
Since I no longer compete in the mixed martial arts, the losses course, I do love it when they leave Georgia for better opportunities in California in their budget. That's kind of an irony to me. Questions from members of the committee? Yes. It gives me angst when they leave us for New York and California.
Mr. Secretary, are we not required by law to have one of those?
I'm sorry?
Are we not required by law to have that position?
I don't believe we are. I mean, we've got, the Deputy Secretary of State, Kelly Farr, who has.
Pardon me for interrupting, but you have someone that will fulfill that role. That's what I was saying. I think one has to have somebody to fulfill that role, or you can't have any of that going on.
Right. I think I better understand your question now. The way we're handling that position being gone is Kelly Farr, the Deputy Secretary of State, used to be in that position. So we have got some other employees that we have put over there doing kind of the busy work of the commission with Kelly's supervision. And then to make up for the loss of Andy Foster's, one of the things that Andy brought to the commission was he was a fighter himself, very experienced in what happens on fight nights and the regulatory part of it. And to make up for that, which has been practiced before in the state of Georgia, before Andy was here, we can just hire those positions out on fight night and take care of it that way. So we're still doing the required work of the commission with the folks that we have on board. It's just continued to give us a little more to do with less people, which is not unusual in today's budgeting environment.
Dickey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned about the inspection and security firms, only 2%. What kind of findings are you finding things troubling that we need more? I mean, is it just?
Well, one of the things that concerns me as part of our regulatory job is we're supposed to protect Georgians from investment scams and frauds. And, our folks, we've really kind of totally revamped the securities division in the office over the last year and a half with myself and Vincent Russo leading the effort on that. We've rewritten a lot of the rules and security laws. But one of the things that does concern me is when you compare us to other states with the amount of people and the amount of folks that we're supposed to regulate, we just don't have the numbers that we would like. And we through our audits last year picked up on a case that was stop some bad guys from doing what they were doing. But like the Commissioner of Revenue said on the tax returns, we're going after people, but we could be doing more with more resources. And I think from when you look at the division's budget, and I hope this figure's right, I hope my staff will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our budget was about $800,000 in the securities division last year, and I think we brought in about 10 or 12 million in fines and settlements. And if it wasn't that number last year, it was the year before. So we have the ability to raise some revenue by doing this work, but it does concern me that we have more people to regulate, and if the cut's whole, we're going to have even less people to do that work with.
Thank you. Chairman Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I mean this is a friendly question. I just want to clarify something. When you talked about the number of unanswered calls per day, you talked about the elimination of one position, and that is an average of about 110. So do you know what the average number of unanswered calls are preceding this 110 calls? How many calls are they're just taking so long that we're not able to answer them?
Well, I think there's two issues we have. Our average call center wait time is probably 6 minutes right now, but that is not real good. That's gone up from where it was a year and a half ago considerably. I mean, we had one of the things I first did in office, because that was one of the biggest complaints I got, was call center wait times. We consolidated our call center division. We hired a professional manager. We got new technology. We actually fired people that were hanging up on folks to make their times look better, as bad as that is to say. We also let people go that are like me that can't type and talk on the phone at the same time because they don't make good call center operators. But we, turn that around. We're measuring every single thing we can do now. We listen in the calls. And if you measure us to the private sector, with the amount of work that we have and the number of calls we get, we probably need 30 call center operators, and we have, 23 if everybody shows up on a given day.
And I'm not trying to be state something bad. I guess I'm just it just gives me pause, and I know you're not the one driving this. It's this result of budget cuts, and there's very little you can do outside that. It just gives me pause or concern that we're going to knowingly eliminate another 110 calls a day that we're going to be able to talk to our customers that are calling in. And I know you tried to with technology and people and things, and I just get concerned for all of our levels of government when we get to the point where we're not able to provide a certain level of service. And again, I'm not trying to be too negative on that. I think that we have to be very careful as a state as we look at these departments, because a lot of departments have done what you've done. They've made the very difficult decisions in doing this. So we're conservative. We're trying to spend our resources wisely. It just, at some point in time, I think we all want this economy to turn around so that we can proactively supply some of the service that our customers really need and deserve.
Well, and
I appreciate the difficulties that you have. So anyway, just.
Well, and I appreciate that, and nobody appreciates the position you all are in. I've been in the legislature in some pretty tough years too, and understand making tough decisions. But I think as several members of this committee have been hearing some of the legislation that's going on that deals with our office, a lot of that is a result of people don't feel like they're getting good customer service, and they're paying fees to do that. And that's a whole nother argument. But every day we have people calling the front office complaining, people that are trying to start businesses in the state, legislators that are coming in saying my constituent was on hold for 45 minutes. So we're well aware of it. We're trying to do everything we can, driving people to our website, but it's just the volume of work that we have in corporations with securities and with licensing. And then you can imagine, how it is when we have a busy day in those areas, and then we have an election going on or early voting going on. People are calling, where do I? You wouldn't believe how many calls we just get in the front office. People wondering, where do I go vote? So it makes it even worse on those days. But I certainly, I don't want to seem like I'm whining, because I certainly understand that this committee has tough decisions to make, and as we've always said in the Secretary of State's office, we can do a lot more with more people. I'm very confident of that, but we'll do the best we can with what you all appropriate us.
One final question. What percentage of decrease have you experienced in your department over the last, say, 4 years?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure about the last 4. I know since 2008 we're bumping on a 30% budget reduction, and I know we're bumping on almost losing 40% of our people. Which, if that was just the case, we believe it or not, we would be okay. What's also exasperated that is we've continued to get more work to do, just with things that have been going on, growth in the number of corporations in the state, growth in the number of registered voters. A couple of years ago, we had to start licensing pharmacy technicians. The unintended consequence of the HB 87, which hopefully we'll get that resolved this year, but that's put quite a strain on us as well. That's all of those things, plus the cuts and the people reduction have kind of snowballed to where we are.
Thank you.
Representative Allison.
Mr. Secretary, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I was going to follow up on something you'd said. I believe you said that the Securities Division costs you about $800,000 a year, but brings in the state, did you say $8 million? Did I hear that right?
That's what I thought. I thought it was the 12 to 13 million. But and
how much does a regulator cost you?
Well, not very much. I mean, that's kind of our point of our pilot program with our investigators last year. You know, the people, it was $400,000 for the pilot project last year.
Right,
We hired new inspectors, and I think through 6 months they raised about $525,000, and that's through half of the year. So the program already paid for itself. But now with the additional cut this year on top of the whole archives thing, you know, we're going to have to fire those people that we hired. So that's one thing about this office. You know, we're a revenue generator, and if we have more people in securities, we're going to generate more revenue. And that's quite honestly one reason that, you know, when I had to make the difficult decision with archives, I couldn't really take part of our 3% cut in securities or corporations or the licensing division, because especially in securities and corporations, those two budgets combined are only $2 million.
And are your regulators keeping up with pace? I know you said with Dodd-Frank that they are technically, you know, having to regulate more. Is this something where if we put more troops on the ground, you could actually, you know, increase revenues to the state? Because you're talking about a program who's bringing in $10 for every dollar we're spending on it. That's not a bad return on investment.
Well, I think we could, but I think also we'd be doing a better job of protecting the public. I mean, that's the thing that concerns me. And you know, when you look around and see what other states are doing and comparing those to our sides, and of course, you know, that's easy to do if you got a lot of money floating around. When you don't, it doesn't really matter. But that's I mean, I'd be lying to you if that wasn't one of the things that concerns me, that if we, you know, have a Bernie Madoff type scenario that starts in Georgia, there's going to be a lot of fingers pointed as to why that happened. And that's, you know, that's part of our job. So I feel like, you know, part of my job as Secretary of State is to tell you guys and the OPB what our needs are in these divisions, and we've done that, and we certainly understand if the money's not there to do that, but at least you know what our needs are.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
the
Mr. Chairman.
presentation. Drugs and narcotics. Anything we need to know? All right, very good. How about Real Estate Commission? Anybody, anything we want to know there? All right, perfect. Moving right along. Administrative Services. Page 7 from members of the committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Sid Johnson. I'm Commissioner of the Department of Administrative Services.
Sid, are you passing out War and Peace here?
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead then.
I'm here to support the governor's recommendation. There's 3 items on the tracking sheet that I'd like to speak to. The first one is 1211, eliminate one-time funds related to an inmate compensation concern. It did not pass at the end of last session. Therefore, we needed to remove the funds in FY13 and now in FY14. So this is a repeat item. However, I will bring it to your attention, if it's not already, that there is a resolution, HR 73, that is already going through the legislature. So we do anticipate this coming back. So we'll need to make some funds available at some point, and we'll work with your staff to work on the amount. The second item is transferring funds from the Office of Consumer Protection in our admin budget. We do support this, very important for our communications and marketing effort. And then the final item is risk management, 1251. To increase funds for the Peace Officers Indemnification Trust Fund. We spoke to this at the last hearing. The fund is running out of money, and we're asking for $1 million to put that back in the fund. And the handout will speak to that request.
Members of the committee. Good job. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Office of State Administrative Hearings. Page 7.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon.
Looking at the tracking sheet, lines 12.9 and two sublines there, we support the OPB recommendations, 3% reduction, which we will absorb by not filling a vacant administrative law judge position. And then there's a reduction for our tax court, straight across 3% reduction from their appropriated amount. We're here for any questions. We have the tax judge here also if you have any questions for him. I know he drew some questions last time, so we have him here. We're ready to answer any questions anyone might have.
A discussion from members of the committee. We had a discussion in the small budget, little budget, supplemental budget about whether the amount was correct, and the amount we took out. There was a nice clean, I'm going from memory now, $100,000 as I see it.
Right.
Would you like to spend a minute and a half and just update members of the committee on?
Well, perhaps I think our tax tribunal judge would be best to do that. Let's let him address that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. As you will recall, originally it was 100,000. It was quite frankly a plug number and a rounded number. I think the committee had thought that given it was a half year, we could just do that. As we suggested to the committee, the 100 is, we think we would recommend 124. We think would leave about $12,000 as a reserve for startup capital expenses for the 13 budget. For the 14 budget, we can absorb the 3% with some just reductions in anticipated expenses.
That's an adjustment we made. Again, we took half of it because we were halfway through the year and they had that 100,000 sitting there, and it was hard to find out what the right number was. So thank you for that explanation.
Thanks, sir.
And I think that's it. Thank you, Mr. Thank you. I'm sorry. I didn't ask. Any questions from members of the committee? Bless you. Thank you. GTA. Members of the committee, where are we at, Jeremy? Page.
Mr. Chairman, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I think in a tracking document, I don't think we're listed there. So I know the last time that we were together, we had a number of questions, and I thought if we could just spend just a few minutes on maybe trying to clarify and bring some additional insight to a couple of the questions that we had last time, if that's all right with you. On the first slide, I know that there was a number of questions on what GTA is involved in and what we're not. So I tried to take an attempt to say, basically, these are the areas that are in the telecom line item when you're seeing that in different agencies' budgets. I know that we talked a good bit about that in the last hearing, but even all of that item is not 100% GTA. There are other telecommunication charges that would be listed there for an agency, but that's where you would find us. And I won't read all these to you, but the big items for like the phone services and the service tech area, security. It's the labor component of those areas as well. So I know there was just a number of questions around what was in and what was out, so I wanted to make sure that was clear. What's not listed here is the application side software, that area. That's the responsibility of the agencies. And this, again, is for the 15 largest agencies, or what we call the full service agencies, that will be included. On the second slide, again, just I know we talked about this, but I think sometimes the picture describes it much better. When you're seeing IT expenditures and agencies are talking about the amount that they're spending in information technology, that would be the entire stack here. We estimate that total cost to the state each year is around $1 billion of technology spending. The blue area is infrastructure, which again are the items listed on slide 1. and GTA is probably about 80% of that blue area. So again, just trying to make sure there's some more clarity on all of IT is not GTA. It's a very specific component of that we work with. And then if I could just point to the third slide. I know that there's some technical headings across the top, but again, just wanted to point to the fact that of the modernization effort that the state's in the middle of, we talked about the 55,000 line items of that program. To just give you a visual on the amount of work that's been completed, so the blue areas on that chart represent that it's complete, green is in flight, and then the white boxes are areas that are the work needs to be started on. And then I think the last item was just giving you where we discussed at the last meeting where some of the agencies had brought up issues in certain areas, just to respond back to the committee in black and white on what the findings were for those particular areas. And I'm happy to go into any of those in more detail if you would like.
Members of the committee, any questions? Going once. Appreciate it, Calvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For members of the committee, we're about to adjourn. We're going to have a little work session, kind of roll up our sleeves and see what we want to do. But I certainly appreciate it, and thank you all for being here today. This time.